don't know if I should say this. I love catechizing former occultists because they get it. I've had more than one person say to me, yeah, I was getting way too deep into this. I was being haunted by these demons. I couldn't figure it out. I heard about orthodoxy. I didn't know what it was. I put icons up on my house and the demons stopped attacking me. So I'm all in. And I'm like, great. I mean, so, we laugh and it's funny, but it's so real for these people. And so that, I bring this up as an example because that's the kind of person with whom you don't have to have any iconoclasm discussion, right? That all that kind of, but the Old Testament says blah, blah, blah. You can't make a graven image. Like, that's so academic. When somebody's being haunted by a demon and they put icons up and the demons go away, there's like, no
man.
It worked. There's exactly. There's no, and it's not academic. It's deeply practical.
This is Jonathan Pedro. Welcome to the Symbolic World.
Hello, everyone. I'm here with Dr. Zach Porcu. And so Dr. Zach has written a wonderful book. It's called Journey to Reality. Many of you might recognize the book. I have been noticing, even in my own parish, that this is being recommended by young people, by priests, as a kind of introduction to orthodoxy. And I think that what's interesting about this book is that it's a kind of introduction to orthodoxy for the times, you could say, because it tries to introduce orthodoxy, first of all, as a kind of cosmic vision, as a worldview. It doesn't go into, it's not as much about theology, but really about a way of engaging with reality. And so it seemed to me like it's perfect for our time. So Dr. Zach, thanks for talking to me.
Thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure.
And so what motivated the writing of this book?
For students, actually. So when I was doing my doctoral program, I was a teaching fellow. And so they make all the teaching fellows teach the standard Introduction to Theology course that all incoming freshmen have to take. And they wanted me to teach. I said, well, what I have to teach in this course? They said, well, just the Old Testament, the New Testament, church fathers, doctrine, and church history in one semester.
There you go.
And so I was completely strapped for short things to assign the students. And what I found was that it's hard to find short, concise things written at a high school reading level that do this, but also that even when I could, you can't just tell 19-year-olds the what in this day and age. You can say the what. God is three persons in one essence, Christ is two natures, yada, yada, and then they just stare at you. And they're so what? That was the look on all their faces.
Exactly. What does it mean?
Yeah. So what?
Yeah.
Why do I care? Why should I care about any of this? And what I realized that I had to do in order to make this course in any way coherent to them was I had to totally reframe all of their categories for how to think about the world in order to get at the so what. And that's why I kind of spend the whole first part of the book taking apart basic definitions. What is religion? What do we mean by God? Where did all this start?
And so you wrote it for like 19-year-olds for like high school, you said, or like early, like kind of
college freshmen.
College freshmen, yeah.
College freshmen. And they did not, so it had to be high school reading level because they're incoming freshmen.
Yeah.
So I had to write basically a book about metaphysics and epistemology without using any of those words. And it's so funny because
that it would become a kind of introduction book for people that are just dropping off the street. Yeah, wild.
That's right. And what's so funny is that I wrote it alongside, because I was writing it for teaching while I was dissertating. And so I wrote it alongside my dissertation. And I worked on both every day, and the dissertation was way, way easier to write because if you use all these big words and convoluted, incomprehensible sentences, they like that.
Yeah, trying to actually say the thing very simply, and especially in a way that, like you said, I think most people it's okay. You know, when we go to church for a very long time, this happens in all the different, Christian churches, you end up having a kind of lingo, and it's very comforting, right? The lingo is very comforting because it can signal inside, it can signal that we're on the same team. And so it plays a function. But like you said, sometimes people actually don't really know what those words mean, or they have a very kind of fragmentary understanding of what that is. And so if you can't explain these concepts, Christ didn't use complicated theological terms. And so if you can't explain these theological terms in ways that can reach a normal person that's never heard about theology, then what are you talking about? Like, what are you saying?
Yeah. And it was, at 7 a.m., a required course for everyone of every major. So it was a very hard sell. And so you really, I mean, it's a tough class. And so I really had to sell this as, why is this relevant at all for you to think about? And so I would do these reading summaries. That was how I taught. And when all the reading summaries came back incoherent, I rewrote the chapter. So I just rewrote this book over and over and over again in response to student feedback. So in a lot of ways, I mean, they wrote the book.
Yeah. They told you what they could grasp and when they couldn't grasp,
The problem with history is that you are in it. Plutarch teaches us how to read power symbolically, asking whom does the person serve to predict leadership patterns before they play out. Join me for 8 weeks studying Lycurgus, Alcibiades, Lysander, Pompey, Caesar, and Octavian as living patterns, not dead men. Does the world look mad to you? This feeling of madness is something which we all share, especially the one who spend more time than maybe we should following the modern news cycle. Well, one wise Englishman once said there is a system in his madness. And one wise Greek 2000 years ago explained what is the system behind the madnesses of great men. Join me to read Plutarch symbolically.
What have you noticed is the biggest obstacle to understanding why this is relevant for people?
The whole framework of the modern world, the sort of secularism or humanism or whatever you want to call it, that assumes materialism or dualism at best, means that people just have this almost impenetrable conceptual barrier for things like sacraments, because they can't imagine a world where the spiritual and the physical are fundamentally interrelated. And they don't have the vocabulary for it, but they're functionally materialists, or they're functionally dualists, or like they believe in the spiritual, but it's somewhere else,
Yeah, and also there's a weird idea that in some ways spirituality is related to more like psychology, something like that, and therefore, anything spiritual has to go through the psychological. And so if you have a kind of ritual or a practice that you have in church, then people struggle to understand how that can be a vehicle for spiritual transformation.
And so sort of redeeming, I mean, everyone's talking about re-enchantment, and I encountered this when I was reading Charles Taylor in grad school, and it's now everyone's saying re-enchantment and talking about it. And I think that's fine. I think that's probably the best way to talk about it, because you have to reframe the idea that matter itself has spiritual content, rather than thinking that matter is just neutral. It's just a tree. It's just a chemical reaction. And that way of thinking is so deeply embedded, even in people who identify very piously and sincerely as Christians.
Yeah. I mean, that's really the thing that I've been fighting against in some ways since I started, is to help people realize that there is no unpatterned reality, right? And there's no such thing as a material world that doesn't exist in patterns. And if that's true, then it means everything that is patterned reality, has a claim to to a form of reality, even though some people struggle. If you can't hold it in your hands and you can't measure it, they struggle to understand. But they, that a city or, a team or all these things, they are patterned materiality in the same way that, a car is, or, a rock or something like that. And that's a big struggle for modern people.
Yeah. And it's hard too, because when you start bringing in the kind of language that some of the 20th century German hermeneuticists used to kind of take apart the Enlightenment, they said, well, I don't know if you're familiar, Michael Polanyi said, all knowledge is personal knowledge, participation through indwelling. And when you say something like that, and I use this participatory language in the book, people immediately jump to, oh, okay, so everything's subjective.
Yeah, exactly.
Everything's internal. And so I was faced constantly with, when I said knowledge is personal, even the way you see physical reality is conditioned by your cultural vision, which is really a lot of what's in Spengler, actually. He says that individual cultures see the world a certain way. That's what a culture means. And when I say that, then people think like, oh, I can see the world however I want to. There is no pattern. The pattern's inside me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that is the biggest obstacle, the subjective objective world. And it's funny because it's so odd to face people that at least espouse a kind of atheism or a kind of materialism. If you ask them, if they would say, yeah, we're scientific, everything but they still believe in this arbitrary internal world. It seems like if you were truly a physicalist, then you would understand that your internal world has to be conditioned by the same types of constraints and pressures that made the external world. And so how can it be possible to be both a kind of reductionist or a physicalist and at the same time believe in this duality? It's weird.
It's weird because I think we talked about this a little bit when you were in Riverside. I just don't understand how you can even believe in minds on physicalism, in minds at all. Why should there be a self?
Yeah, it's a kind of epiphenomenon of material causes, but that even people that would say that, you just wait 10 seconds and then you catch them falling into Descartes dualism. They just do, as soon as they forget the subject they're talking about, as soon as they forget that they're actually discussing the fact that minds don't exist, you just wait 10 seconds and you catch them. It's watching the new atheists do that is the funniest, like watching Sam Harris or Dawkins do that, on the one hand, have this kind of, it's just this, it's just that, this reductionist language, and then you wait, and then they become pearl-clutching moralists. 5 seconds later, it's hilarious.
Yeah, it's the same, with the moralism, where it's like, well, there's no, absolute moral standards don't exist. And then 2 seconds later, well, the Christian church does these horrible moral atrocities, and you're just like, where... But going back to the seeing thing, something that helped me, maybe you could use this on people. Something that helped me articulate this is, do you know the guy in the gorilla suit experiment?
Yeah, I've seen it. It's pretty amazing. It's astounding.
It's incredible. So I don't know, those of you who
we can describe it. Jordan Peterson uses that as an example, so many people have said it. Maybe you can describe it for people. It's quite astounding.
Yeah, they do this test and they show a video to the subject, and the subject is watching the video, and it's a video of these basketball players passing a basketball. And it's been done many times in many versions, and the tester tells the subject, you need to count how many times the basketball is passed, or how many times it's passed to this team, or whatever. And so the subject sits there and watches it, and then after the end of the video, the tester says, okay, how many times? And the subject said, 17. Did I get it right? And the tester says, yes, you did. But did you see the guy in the gorilla suit wave at you? And they are like, all right, what do you, no, I would have seen that. And the tester says, yeah, a guy in a gorilla suit walked up, stood in the center of the frame, waved at the audience, and walked off stage. And the tester goes, no, I would have, or the subject goes, no, I would have noticed that. Then they play it back, and there it is. And this was used, I think, at the time to disprove the effectiveness of eyewitness testimony in courtrooms, because they say, oh, well, eyewitness evidence is so unreliable. But the takeaway was that you only see what you're looking for.
Yeah.
And you don't see what you're not looking for. And I thought that this study I thought this study proved way too much, because what it proves to me is that even the material world cannot be seen. Like, seeing material things itself gets problematized by what your beliefs are.
Yeah, of course.
So if a spirit, people say, well, where are spirits? Well, I thought where are ghosts? Where are spirits? All these other cultures believed in it in the past that we don't now. I guess they were stupid. And it's the gorilla suit experiment shows me, at least, I'm pretty convinced that your perception of physical reality itself is problematic. It's based on your beliefs.
Yeah, you can. I mean, people experiment this. We experiment this in movies all the time. Where in some ways the movie will set it up so that, like, a good example, The Sixth Sense was one of the best ones, right? Where you don't notice, or maybe you notice, but you kind of push them to the side. There are all these narrative incoherences in the movie, and you just kind of toss them out. You don't really string them together. And then when you get to the punchline, all of a sudden, all the incoherences that you barely noticed all of a sudden get strung together, and then you see something from the beginning of the movie. You actually re-see the movie in your head from the beginning, and then all this stuff becomes coherent. And like you said, you realize that there are pattern realities that it is possible not to notice if you're not looking for them. And so, like you said, let's say the signs of things like ghosts or things like spirits, or the effect of, let's say, transpersonal agency, if you're not trained to see it, you wouldn't see it. My friend J.P. Marceau, he pushes it really hard. He talks about this idea of people that can see auras. He uses kind of new age kind of thing. But he said, imagine when you're a child and you look at your mother, you just see a face. Like, you see this face, and at first you don't even see a face. You just see a bunch of stuff. And then slowly this stuff, it's all discombobulated, then it becomes a face, and then it becomes your mother, and then it becomes all these things. And then when you become older, you can become trained to notice emotions. Like, you can look at someone and you can see their emotion. And it's like, well, what the hell are you talking about? Like, how can you see an emotion? Well, exactly. You're trained to see subtle differences in material causes that makes you see the emotion. And people that are autistic or that have some impairment, they're not capable of seeing those subtle changes. And he was saying something like, how high does this go?
Yeah.
Right? How much is it possible to see in subtle, by being subtly trained to look at someone's face or to look at someone? Could you see into their soul? Like, if you imagine a monk that has some kind of visionary capacity, will look at you.
Clairvoyance.
Yeah, he sees through you. In the same way that I can look at you and see if you're angry or you're mad or you're sad, but he can see way more because he has that capacity to notice very, very subtle patterning in human behavior.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't, when you kind of let the cat out of the bag with that idea, it kind of doesn't end. And so what I was telling catechumens was, if you could see reality, because that's why the book's called Journey to Reality. It's this idea that we're not real yet. We don't see the world as it is. And I told the catechumens, if you could see reality, you would see the Holy Spirit descend on the gifts in the liturgy. Yeah. You would see, and people have seen it, if according to various reports. Oftentimes little children, I've heard many stories about this. They see the Holy Spirit. And so is the failure, let me put it this way, but that idea that our perceptions are somehow inadequate, and that those perceptions get more adequate when we increase in something like virtue, is just not even in the imaginative framework of a society like ours, which is so informed by Enlightenment thinking.
Yeah, and you see it, and there's also, I mean, this is my experience. Like, this is not of my own virtue, but when I went to Mount Athos last time, and I met one of the abbots of the monastery where I was staying, I mean, he was glowing. Like, I don't know how else to say it. He was definitely like there, and everybody in the room saw it, and everybody, and then I kept thinking, like, and then he said some things. If we had just transcribed what he had said, you're like, he just said what Jesus says. Like he just said, just basic Christian things. He didn't say anything particularly different from what you would read in the gospel or what you would, but there was a kind of presence that was, and I don't know what words to use, because obviously there was no light, like physical. It's not like, there's no other way to describe what I was seeing besides something like he was glowing. But I mean, it's not like if I turned the light out, he would be glowing in the dark. Like it wasn't the same kind of physical. But the only analogy I can use is to say that, is just to use that term. And so, like you said, I can imagine the same with someone who is so attuned that they see the Holy Spirit descend on the host. Just like I see my wife's emotion, which is invisible and is an internal state. And you say, like, what does sadness look like? And I can't tell you what sadness looks like. I mean, it's like I can tell when my wife is sad, but it's a particular experience of something that is invisible. In the same way, like you said, that reality holds so much. We're just finishing Dante right now. We're just finishing the last canto. Like I'm actually this morning I was reading Canto 32, and you get this exactly what you're saying, where it's like Dante ascends the heavens and he looks at Beatrice, and the higher he is in the heavens, the more resplendent she is, right? And the more she is just like this overwhelming presence and this overwhelming light. It's always the same gesture. She looks at him and she smiles. She looks at him and she smiles. But in that same gesture, at every level of heaven, he sees more and more of God, until, in some ways he's trained to look directly at God, because he saw through her this reality. And so, it's when you read it, if you read it without a certain sensitivity, it can look like kind of science fiction type, like there's light and he sees light and everything. But if you've had that little experience of seeing something behind the mask, when you look at someone, then you know that, like you said, there's way more behind that. Like there are levels behind that are far. And this is hard, I think, for modern people to realize, because it actually is it is something that you experience. It's not like a mental thing. It's not just like when I see the sadness in my wife, it's not a mental thing. It's a actual experience. And so it's hard, because a lot of materialists will then misinterpret that as a kind of materialist transformation. Like, I don't know how to say it, like a kind of Marvel comics kind of, when in Marvel comics they'll show like the light coming out and
Oh,
it's like,
yes.
like electricity that's like exuding,
Or it's attributable to forces that science simply hasn't mapped out yet, or something like that. It's so weird, that the accusation of the God of the gaps thing, when really there's this science of the gaps, like we haven't mapped that out yet. Yeah. But it's like, I don't know, you sort of get the opposite picture in some of C.S. Lewis's imagery too, like the dwarves in Narnia or the people in The Great Divorce, where they literally can't see the physical thing going on because of this sort of moral deficiency that's happening.
Yeah, and that's also that's also so true. Like that's something that you see all the time. I really do have this intuition that in some ways, when Christ is saying, to not judge your brother, it's actually a training mechanism. It's actually training yourself to see the right patterns, so that when you encounter someone, you're always encountering Christ in them, and you're actually calling that person into becoming that by encountering that. Like if I encounter you and I see in you the best aspect of you, and I see, the highest aspect of you, and you can see that in my face, so that's what I'm encountering. It's like I'm actually calling you to become that. But, everybody has had moments like that, or everybody's met people that doesn't matter what's in front of them. They just see the faults. Yeah.
And these ideas are in the culture. I mean, people believe in manifesting, and people believe in karma, and people believe at a sort of a pop level in the idea that the physical and the spiritual are interpenetrated. And so I'm wondering, something I've been talking a lot about on my podcast recently is the way in which we're kind of coming back to a sort of naive paganism. It's not like the Greco-Roman paganism, but we're coming back to a sort of weird re-enchantment. And in there are the kind of categories that would allow somebody to understand the sacraments.
That
you know,
makes... Yeah, go ahead.
I was in class and I said, okay, who, I would always challenge the students and I say, what you guys, I give them some standard materialist thing and they would agree to it basically. And then I say, okay, but raise your hand if you believe in karma. And all the girls raised their hand.
Oh, yeah,
and I said, of course, and I said, oh, so you're really worried about how you're going to get reborn in the next life. That's really what you're concerned with, right? And they're like, no. And I said, well, that's what karma is about, friends. It's about, you don't want to be reborn as a cockroach. You want to be reborn as a princess. That's really what keeps you up at night. And they're like, no, because they're Americans. They don't have a Hindu sense of karma. And so I said, well, what do you mean by that? And they said, well, if you do good things, then good things happen to you. I said, why do you think that? What does that even mean? What do you mean good things? Explain all of that to me. And then when they realized, oh, I guess I don't believe in materialism. I guess I do believe that there's this moral thing out there. And I don't remember if it was William Lane Craig or it was one of the other kind of Protestant philosopher types from about 10 years ago. He said, we know that the moral law exists the same way that we know the physical world exists, because when you try to move around in it, you run into it. If you try to move around in the physical world, you run into a physical object. And in the same way, you run into the moral reality when you try to do things. And we all just know that. We feel, it's the same thing that you're talking about. You run into people's emotions, even though you can't see them.
Yeah. Yeah, that's absolutely, I think that at this point, hopefully for most people, that's kind of also the kind of undeniable, this idea that I do still hear people say ridiculous things like, there's no moral order to the world. And I even, sometimes I want to just completely deracinated it from moralism, the way that you think about it. I'm like, okay, let's forget the moral aspect at the outset and let's just say actions have consequences. Like if you do certain things will happen to you, and that is, you can't avoid that. It's like you can avoid it for a little while sometimes, but then at some point it just crashes back. And that's it. Like I could say, okay, well, if you want everybody to hate you and to be alienated from your society, then here's how you act. Like just lie and cheat and steal, do these things. And you could say, is it a moral good? Well, do it for a while, see what it does for you. And you'll notice that it's dragging you down. Like you'll notice that it's actually making you a slave. It makes you a slave of others. Someone's going to put you in prison at some point. Someone's going to threaten you. You're basically going to become imprisoned by your behavior. But there's these other behaviors that you can engage with. And if you do those, certain things will happen to you as well. And you can experiment with it and you can see what happens. And so, yeah, I think that's now how, when I face a moral relativist, that's kind of my approach now, is to just say, well, if you don't believe in absolute moral good, there's at least an applied moral good, because there are things that happen and there's a hierarchy of them too. Most people would probably agree that there are certain societies that ran on certain patterns, but that also, ran themselves into the ground, and you probably don't want that.
Right.
Yeah. And you see it now, like a good example now is like the sexual revolution is such a great example. Like you could say, okay, well, you want the sexual revolution, everything is relative, everything is like, well, if you do that, then you're not going to have people anymore. You're going to run out of people, and that's kind of that's a reality. So if you want to run out of people, then do these things, and then you're gonna stop to exist. But if you think that it's probably good, that people exist, or that that people should continue to exist, then you actually can't engage in all these behaviors because they lead to a certain result, and we have the numbers, of those results.
Yeah, it's quite grim, actually. Yeah. I would wonder if that would that kind of argumentation would make people think too consequentially about morality, meaning like use it too much as a means to an end. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
The thing that I've been using a lot too is saying, because something that's very indicative of the sort of Western post-Christian reformist temperament about politics and society and morality is outrage. People are so outraged because they have, and moral indignation, because we're kind of utopianists in the West. We think that with the right combination of laws and people, then we can make the perfect society. And so there's a lot of outrage because, of course, we're not at the perfect society. And so I try to poke at people's outrage and I say, well, why are you so upset? What's the big deal? Why, and then you quickly uncover that they believe that there's such a thing as the moral law. And so, like you said, I think it's very hard. I think materialism is dead. That kind of naive atheism just it wasn't able to sustain itself for that long because everybody has to believe in morality.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering, what the best way is to start with that belief that the moral law is real and it's outside of us and independent of us and it's something that we ought to conform to. And then how do we start putting that together? Because now when you start with that, now you're on the same page as every other great civilization in human history. And then you can have a conversation about religion.
Yeah. And do you see, because you've been talking to all these 19-year-olds for how long? Are you still teaching?
No, so I taught that course for 5 years at Catholic University in D.C. Then we moved to California, and I taught at the University of St. Catherine until it closed a couple of years ago. And so I'm just podcasting now.
Okay, all right.
I'm catechizing, so I teach catechumens at church.
At this church
at
in
St. Andrew.
Yeah, exactly. My question is, did you, let's say in the time that you were teaching that class, like a few years ago, did you see a change happening in the young people, either better or worse, like in terms of their capacity to assimilate these ideas or these questions?
En masse, because it was mostly Generation Z. And so in general, over the time that I was teaching, about 7 years, I didn't see a very great change in mass in the generation. But at an individual level, it was so rewarding because so many people would individually come up to me at the end of the semester or email me or take me aside privately and say, hey, I just want to thank you for this course. No one has ever talked to me about religion in this way at all, ever. And these were some people who had been in Catholic school from K through 12. They'd been Protestants their whole life. Some of them were Orthodox. It's just nobody had ever sat there and reframed the categories underneath all of these things in a way that allowed them to make sense for these kids. And it wasn't that the kids were, I wonder if young people get too much of a bad rap, or, they're not interested, they don't care, they're blah, blah, blah. But no one had ever made them care before. And once I offered that conceptual reframing, it was just incredible. It was really breathtaking to see them go, oh yeah, this is what I've always believed. But no one told me that this is what I believed. So glory to God. It was really a deeply rewarding kind of ministry, really.
And what are you seeing now? Because now you're teaching catechesis in an actual church. What do you see coming downstream? Because there's been a lot, obviously there have been a lot of catechumen, a lot of young people coming in. And so what's your perception of that whole motion?
It's very mixed. And I'm in Southern California, so that's a very different kind of milieu than other milieus. Southern California is we're the home of a lot of mega churches, a lot of Protestant mega churches, there's a lot of interreligious, etc. And also there's a lot of occultism in an alternative religion in Southern California. And so I get a lot of ex-Protestants in our church who need to be disabused of their Protestant categories, specifically in the sense that those Protestant categories 9 times out of 10 are just Enlightenment categories, which is what's so awkward about the conversation. Is you say, well, this thing that you think is quote unquote biblical is actually secular humanism, as it turns out. And so and I think that's kind of an ongoing problem. But increasingly, we get so many people who have an occult background. And I actually, I don't know if I should say this. I love catechizing former occultists because they get it.
Yeah,
They
because
don't need.
that's what they were looking for when they went. A lot of people going towards the occult, they're realizing there has to be an ontological structure. There has to be a metaphysics which undergirds these religious things. And so when they read the 19th century occultists, that's what it seems to me. That's what at least when I was young, that's what was going on. It was like people looking to say, well, what's the meaning structure underneath? What's the will? What's the relationship between my consciousness and, manifestation? And so it's like you said, it makes sense that occultists would discover that orthodoxy actually offers a much more complete ontological structure than the occultist one,
or a solution. So, I've had more than one person say to me, yeah, I was getting way too deep into this. I was being haunted by these demons. I couldn't figure it out. I heard about orthodoxy. I didn't know what it was. I put icons up on my house and the demons stopped attacking me. So I'm all in. And I'm like, great. I mean, so, we laugh and it's funny, but it's so real for these people. And so that I bring this up as an example because that's the kind of person with whom you don't have to have any iconoclasm discussion, right? That kind of, but the Old Testament says blah, blah, blah. You can't make a graven image. Like, that's so academic. When somebody's being haunted by a demon and they put icons up and the demons go away, there's no man. It worked. There's exactly. There's no, and it's not academic. It's deeply practical, And so, in a real way, those kinds of experiences strike me as being much more late antique Christianity experience, much more like the early church dealing with these kinds of real problems.
Yeah. That makes sense because sometimes when you hear stories of missionaries that encounter different cultures and stuff and kind of present Christianity. I think that's often the missing link is that people don't realize that these weren't just theoretical questions, for people. And they had, like you said, they sometimes lived with very, very old things that had a lot of power that they had to propitiate constantly, and they were having to deal with all these things. You see it. I mean, the story of St. George is a kind of like a reduction of something like that, where it's like, well, if you have to have human sacrifices every year, and someone comes and presents you, something that's effective to stop that, most people will be like, hey. All right, let's stop all this nonsense or all this destructive stuff.
Yeah, and something on that note, something that a lot of people don't know is that the Romans had exorcisms too. I mean, all these old cultures who knew and dealt with the reality of spirits had exorcisms, and a lot of Romans were won over on the basis of how much more effective the Christian exorcism was. It was just practical.
There are crazy stories. I was being interviewed by a Coptic priest, and and then off camera, he started telling me these crazy stories about. I mean, this is wild. Like the monastery where St. Moses the Ethiopian is, right? St. Moses the Black is, and his sarcophagus is there, and it's like 7 feet. It's like a huge sarcophagus, and it's closed. And at least when he told me the story, he said that there's a monk who has a very close relationship to St. Moses. And so he sits next to the sarcophagus and they talk to each other. And he whispers to St. Moses. And then there's a long line of people that come to receive healing from St. Moses. And it's Muslims, it's Christians, it's like whatever,
Yeah,
just
cool.
any kind of person. People just come, and then supposedly the monk, he whispers to St. Moses, and then the tomb starts to shake and people get healed. This is the story I heard, folks. I didn't witness it myself, but this is the story I heard of a man who saw it himself.
But I mean, there are so many stories like this everywhere. And you can just say, well, I mean, back to the kind of original point, is I think those sorts of stories are hard for us as Westerners. Whereas an ancient person would have just been like, yeah, sure. Why not?
Yeah, I'm cynical. Like, you saw how I told the story. The whole time I'm like making excuses. I have to say, I'm such a modern person. People tell me about the mirror streaming icons, and I'm like, yeah, I'll see it when I believe it. I'll believe it when I see it, and
Well, you will see it when you believe it too.
yeah, exactly. Well, I did see the mirror streaming icon of Hawaii when I was in a church in Louisville. I think it would just showed up, and
The Avalon icon.
it's like, I'm still such a modern person. I was looking at it and I'm thinking, it's a pretty big box. It's like being so cynical. But I talked to a nun once who saw the mirror streaming icon of Montreal, and I trusted her. She said she spent the night with the icon because she was helping the guardian, because obviously the guardian can't be with the icon all the time. And she said, it's just a piece of paper. And she like put her face like right up to it, and she was just waiting, and she could just see like the beads pop out. And she said, "There's no like it's just a photocopy,
Yeah.
Anyway, but yeah, so you can see that I'm just such a modern person, because I'm very cynical about all that stuff. I believe in it like theoretically, but as soon as someone gives me a story, I'm like, yeah, maybe, maybe.
Maybe. Yeah. No, it's in the water, So actually, this is a question I wanted to ask you. So people really liked Journey to Reality, Glory to God, and they've been appreciating kind of me getting more into these sorts of topics in my podcast. But something that people keep asking me over and over again, and it started with the students. They said, "We love the book. It's great. We get it. What do we do? How do we actually put this into practice?" And the answer is not just go to liturgy and be a Christian, because I get all these neophytes in our church. We've actually just turned into a neophyte church because we have so many catechumens, and the ratio of neophytes is very high. And they're going to church and doing it, but same kind of thing you're talking about. The categories are all still Protestant, secular, modern, whatever. And, me too, everybody in this culture. So what people have been asking me for is, we need some kind of set of practical things to do. So what I'm working on right now is basically a master class that I'm calling De-Secularization. And it's like a master class style. So there's, short lectures that go along with each lesson and whatever. But then I'm giving all of these exercises and challenges. Do this, journal about this, ask yourself this question. A lot of it's related to putting your phone away, all this kind of practical stuff. So my question that I'm asking everybody, because people keep asking me for this course, and it's coming out soon, but what do you think? Because obviously you could go all over the place with a course like that. What do you see that's something that would be very helpful and healing for people, like a topic? What sorts of things do you think should be focused on in an introductory course like that, given the kinds of things that you see people struggling with in your parish when you're going around giving talks, and the kinds of questions people ask you? What sort of thing would be valuable to people in a course like that, do you think?
I mean, I would say, my advice on that front is always to stay close to what is accessible to you, because it's hard, especially for like people who become Orthodox. It's like you're also moving into like a foreign world. You're learning a new language. Everything about it is new. But the kind of enlightened experiences they're closer to us than we think. They're in our own celebrations, like birthday celebrations or name day celebrations, in holidays, in meals. And so I tend to encourage people to stay close and to say, okay, well, can you make the most of your dining room? Like when you're with your wife and your kids, like, can you create dedicated experiences that will shine? And if you start when the kids are young, that's definitely something you can do. Like, what are these moments that we can have in the everyday life? And that's why we wrote the fairy tales, was because that's something that's immediate, right? Sitting with a child and a book, reading a book to a child is like an immediate entering into a world of that's almost liturgical, and so that's really the advice that I give, is that a lot of people, they go straight to, I could say the Jesus prayer 1,000 times a day, and I can do these like massive spiritual practices. I'm not against those, obviously, but I think there's something to say about staying kind of close to the things that are already around you, and that you can make more bright.
Like our daily lived reality.
Yeah, exactly. And just like a kind of daily discipline. And also, like I said, I think that I focus on meals a lot, especially if you have kids. There are a lot of things that you can do to feel connected, and to kind of leave the mind in a box world that we tend to live in.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm writing this down. Does that? Well, I'm asking everybody. I mean, everyone I talk to, every priest, every catechist, everyone, because there's this real need, I think, that for practical things, because there's lots of good books and good podcasts and good content coming out all of the time now. I mean, there's this huge explosion of good internet orthodoxy, let's say, and re-enchantment is on everybody's minds and all this stuff, but. My concern always, well, a lot of the time is that they become too intellectualized. Because if you just turn it into studying more and more and more, A, that precludes a certain type of person who's not that interested in doing that. And then B, it kind of puts you back inside this internal headspace where you're just thinking through problems, very scholastic, maybe you could say.
Yeah.
But our life is lived.
There's also a simple one, which is obviously the one that the fathers often say. It's like, remember, just remember God, remember your sins, just attention. Practicing attention is pretty, I think it's also like a universal thing. It's not a particularly Christian thing. It's something you see in the fathers, that you see some Buddhist monk tell you or whatever. But I think it's because it's so real that that we're so distracted and we're so swirling in our thoughts, that if you're able to practice just basic attention and basic memory, like remembering yourself and remembering God, that does a lot, I think, too.
And actually, I've often quoted your definition for worship, but let me make sure I'm doing it justice, which was imitative attention. Isn't that how you talk about it? Yeah.
Great.
And so do you find, because I often want to recommend people, I'm sort of on the cusp of including something that looks like meditation in this course, just in the sense of, there's a lot of meanings to that word, obviously, but just in the sense of being totally present and having no thoughts.
Yeah.
In a state of giving total attention to something, just to existing. But I wonder how much that kind of word is a turn off for people who are worried about the influence of New Age thought on Christianity, which is real. That's a real kind of syncretism problem that you see in the 20th century.
But I think that if you use the term practicing attention, I don't think that's a particularly a problem. The idea of focusing attention, and then also avoiding distraction, and having that attention be a physical attention too, right? To just be still and to attend, and to also. The practice of being aware of the logismoi, like of the thoughts, and to kind of let them go. Like, all of those things are totally fine. Just because some Buddhist meditation does the same thing doesn't mean that it's wrong. You see it in the Philokalia and in the Hesychastic Fathers all the time. So I think that it's completely fine. And I know there's been, in the early 20th century and parts of the 20th century, there's been a lot of going against the breathing aspect of the Jesus prayer. But I think that we're but I think that there's been I think that now we're in a better position to help people kind of understand that aspect, and how, in fact, if we do believe in a fully sacramental reality, if you don't object to the fact that the cup that holds the host has to be made of a precious metal, like if you believe that, then why would it bother you that in prayer there would also be a kind of breathing and a type of attention to the body that would help to avoid distraction, And so I think that it's possible to recover those aspects of the Jesus prayer in a way that isn't New Age or whatever, but is actually a more sacramental and kind of incarnational practice of the prayer.
Yeah, and I understand why people have that reaction. Where we just started the next series on my podcast on American religion, and in reading up on this, I was just kind of validated and also still surprised at how much occult and esoteric influence was.
It's weird you're doing that. We're doing that right now too. We just put
Are
out
you? Okay.
Yeah, we just put out our first episode called I think it's called Universal History of American Religion. We talk about the burnt over district.
Yes, that's next week.
No, that's wild that you're doing it at the same time.
You're doing, oh my goodness. Okay.
There you go. Yeah, so there you go. It's in the air, like to help understand the relationship between Kabbalah and the and the Puritans. Like there are these weird connections that people like. The idea that the Salem witch trials were just completely in a vacuum, that nobody was practicing these kinds of magical practices. Okay, whatever.
They were. I mean, it's breathtaking. Well, you guys are in the middle of it right now too. I was just breathtaking to me the extent to which occultism and spirit mediums and seances. I mean, Lincoln held a seance in the White House. I mean, it's just wild.
Yeah.
So I understand.
Yeah, it was those times. But I think go ahead and say what you were going to say about the.
Well, the connection is so I understand why. So by the time we get to the 20th century and there are overtly explicit movements called Satanism and Luciferianism and Hindu syncretism and the Baha'i religion, it's like, I understand why there's a pushback from the evangelicals, even if they are not on solid enough ground to make an adequate pushback, and why that might come into a suspicion of Buddhism or whatever.
Yeah, but you see in the Orthodox, in some of the 20th century ascetics, they really went after the breathing part, and especially the heartbeat part of and said it was dangerous. It was dangerous for your health and all this stuff. And I think they were also afraid that it was turning the Jesus prayer into a kind of an automatic thing. It wasn't related to contrition and to.
Oh, I see.
That it was just it was more like a mantra, like this automatic thing that you do.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that we can recover the more, let's say, embodied aspect of the prayer without falling into that mistake. Especially now with so much of Cogsci and so much of the recent psychological development show us that the body is completely related. You can't separate the body from spiritual practices.
And I even knew a woman on the East Coast who went to her priest and said, I want to do the Jesus prayer. And he literally sent her to a nearby Buddhist center to take a class in breathing meditation. Mm-hmm. He said, go there, learn to breathe, and then come back and I'll teach you the Jesus prayer. And she said, why are you sending me to this Buddhist center? He said, because the human body is the same everywhere. And this is a good resource to learn how to breathe. So you need to breathe to pray. Go do that. You come back. So
that's wild. Never heard anything like that. That's interesting. Very interesting.
And I wonder too how much of, because obviously ecumenist syncretism, where we kind of say all religions are the same or whatever. Obviously that's we can't have that, but I guess I would want a different word for the kind of C.S. Lewisian syncretism that produces books like Christ the Eternal Tao, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, where we say, oh, well, all of this belongs to the faith, no matter where it is. All truth is Christ. So when you encounter truth, you're encountering some part of Christ.
Yeah. But I think that it's been there from the beginning. It's like you have Tertullian versus Justin Martyr, right at the outset. You kind of have these two almost necessary aspects of the tradition. One, which is trying to protect the inside and to prevent corruption and kind of infection. And the other, which is saying, well, if the world is created by God, then it means that God must be present. And therefore, all those that, all truth is our truth, the ancient philosophers, all the things they said were true is Christ's truth, saying, I mean, Justin Martyr even said they were Christians before Christ.
Yeah.
And so I think that, and it's funny because both of those are kind of captured in monasticism. And, you go to Mount Athos, you see the philosophers and the Greek thinkers in the narthex of the churches with their like prophecies. But at the same time, often the monastics are the ones that are the most radical in terms of purity and like protecting the inside and everything. So I think that there'll always be a tension between those two. And if we're sensitive, we can realize that the people that play if we have a certain tendency, that the people that have the opposite tendency, they are also necessary. They're probably a good check on you, no matter which side you're on. They're probably a good check on you to prevent excesses in believing that the world is arbitrary and that the world isn't actually created by God and God's grace isn't present in the world, and that everything is fallen and corrupted in a kind of Calvinist way. That's not the Orthodox way. But then at the same time, like you said, we can't have this kind of just like whatever syncretism. That doesn't work either.
Which weirdly, going back to the American religion thing, that's a weird theme I'm noticing in American religion. It starts with Freemasonry and then it leads into Theosophism. There's all of these movements to sort of make this kind of meta-religious movement that tries to include all these other things. And so that's probably a result of the trying to solve the chaos of the Reformation, now that I think about it.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I've been, my insight too about this has been that there seems to be that because the tendency of the Reformation, not right away, but the tendency of the Reformation is to move towards a kind of flattening. Obviously, Anabaptists are the radicals, but even if you don't just take directly Anabaptists, there's a movement towards a kind of flattening. But because reality is actually not flat, it actually doesn't work that way. What happens is secret societies, because there's a kind of secret about the hierarchy of the world that has to reformulate itself. And so you have these people that so you can see like the secret societies, even Freemasonry, like if it really existed before the 17th century, I mean, who knows? I mean, maybe it did, but at least it appears around that time. It starts to bubble up, and so there's a connection between the Enlightenment and the secret societies, right? Descartes wrote these letters to the Rosicrucians, trying to get into their secret thing, and so so it's interesting because in some ways you have I heard traces. This is a little difficult to talk about, but I've heard traces of Hermetic organizations inside the Catholic Church, like actually Catholic priests that are kind of secretly Hermeticists and practice these kind of mixed mystical practices, but it's not officially part of their practice. It's like something apart or on top or whatever. But as in Orthodoxy, we don't have that. We don't need that because the Jesus prayer, which leads to theosis, is just part of our tradition, and you access it to whatever level you can access it. There's no need for a secret doctrine. There's no need for like a secret hierarchy. It's like it's right there.
I wonder if that starts to emerge by the time scholasticism is hitting its full kind of rationalist force, and that kind of causes a esoteric reaction, the way that Enlightenment leans very in on rationalism, and then you get the Romantic kind of pushback against it. I feel like you see those two tendencies in the West since the Middle Ages, the hyper-rational, and then the move away to the sort of secret, emotional, occult, esoteric thing, kind of as a reaction.
I mean, it's possible. For sure, there's an influx from Spain, that came from the kind of Kabbalist movement. And then there's already a kind of Christian Kabbalah during the Renaissance that starts to develop itself. And so it is like you said, before the Reformation, before the Enlightenment, but it's already in those movements that are leading to it. And so, in kind of Renaissance magic, you have these types of influences.
Yeah, but I mean, maybe that starts earlier in the 13th and 14th centuries, where and the divide between the rational and the sort of esoteric.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah. I mean, that's where the Templars, like, so that's where the legends of the Templars are probably, at least the legends around them are probably relevant, in the sense that it's the Templars that are the source of all the esotericism in the West. Like, they all, no matter which one you look at, whether it's the Freemasons or the Rosicrucians or whatever, if you look at their mythology, it goes back to the Templars and to the suppression of the Templars. So
Yeah.
you're probably onto something.
I know we studied, before I was in patristics in my PhD program, I just sort of woke up one day in the medieval department, and we were doing all this translation of medieval manuscripts, and it was really just eye-opening the way that we know very little about the medieval world in a certain sense. I don't know if you know this. There was a ton of text produced in the Middle Ages, and 90% of it has never been translated by anybody. 90%.
Yeah, I totally believe it. I completely believe it. And because, I mean, but in some ways it is, I think it has to do with the Enlightenment and the Dark Ages and all of this stuff. There's a desire, for the same reason the Enlightenment people said the Byzantine Empire,
Right.
quote, for that
Right.
same reason, it was also didn't want you to see anything of the actual medieval text. Yeah. Anyways, we're kind of way off our original subject, but it is definitely very interesting. And so, Dr. Zach, tell us where people, you said you're podcasting now, so tell us where people can find you.
Yeah, so the podcast is it's an Ancient Faith hosted podcast. So it's on Ancient Faith Radio. There's a YouTube channel for it called The Roots of Everything. It's also on the regular kind of Ancient Faith channels, but all of that content with all these bonus episodes are on Substack. So it's just zacharyporcu.substack.com. And that's kind of where I'm putting everything right now, and putting notes actually for the upcoming course, and for I'm trying to do a sequel to this book. Actually, because the thing my students asked me a lot about was, I said, well, what do you want next? And they said sexuality, sexual ethics, because a huge defeater for Generation Z and a lot of other generations is, as soon as they hear that your church might be somehow phobic, it's a non-starter for them.
Yeah.
It's just completely off the table. And so I realized that we needed a whole sequel book about morality and to address sexual ethics. So putting some notes about that.
Step on that landmine for us, Dr. Zach.
That's what everybody said. Everybody said, you go do that.
Right.
But no, I asked Father Josiah for a blessing to write this book. And he said, I'm not giving you a blessing to write this book. And then he paused, and I stared at him, and he goes, I'm demanding it.
That you write this book. That's hilarious.
So, we'll see how that goes.
All right. And everybody, don't forget to check out Journey to Reality. It's good to talk to you, Dr. Zach.
Yeah, it was great to talk to you. Thanks for having me on.